Welcome to this webinar about the EPD process here. I'm Julia Brandt, I'm the Communications Officer at EPD International, and here to moderate this webinar. So the scheduling is as following. First, we have an overview of the EPD, what is it and how it's made, which will be presented by Danielle Krauter-Elving from the EPD Secretariat. Next up is the LCE process. What is a life cycle assessment by Nilay Elgenos-Kanat, LCE expert at the IVL Swedish Research Environmental Institute. And finally, we will have Kate McPheeters, Managing Director EPD North America, to present how EPDs can be used by organization, and be in a business strategy. In the end, we will have a live Q&A session where we'll be able to turn on your mic and cameras and ask questions, LCA or EPD related. The questions can be asked during the webinar as well, using the Q&A function. You can see it in the top right corner, so you can write in your questions there, and we will publish them and answer them as the webinar goes on. So if there are any questions from the beginning here, we'll start off with Danielle to introduce us to the world of EPDs. So here we go. Danielle, you have the floor.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Let's see. Can everyone see my screen here? I got a thumbs up from Julia. Great. Okay, so welcome everyone to this webinar. This is the second webinar now on the same subject. We did one yesterday as well. So my name is Danielle, and I work in the support and finance in the Environdec company. And I will just be doing a presentation of the general EPD process and also what information should be included in an EPD and so on. To begin with, I would like to just present the company EPD International. We are a global program operator who operates around the world. We also have licensees representing us in some regional markets spread out around the globe. We also have the largest PCR library on the market. A PCR is a so-called product category rule, and they are guidelines which are product specific. And I will go through this a bit more later on. We also work a lot with global harmonization and cooperation with other companies and EPD program operators and such. I will proceed. So, to begin with, I will go through, in general, what is an environmental product declaration. It's also called a Type 3 environmental declaration. The purpose of an EPD is that we want to report environmental impacts in a transparent way, which is also comparable, so you can compare different products and their environmental impacts. They are also aimed to be a trustworthy source of information since they are third-party verified. So these next images represent the pyramid of what dictates the rules in an EPD. The bottom two ISO codes are general LCA codes, while the 14025 is the EPD specific rules. So if you're curious about the background to everything, this would be the rules that every EPD follows. We also have our general program instruction, which is our internal guidelines. And this is also a mandatory element for a program operator. As well as this, we have these PCRs or product category rules. And these are used based on which product you are creating an EPD for. And they can also be complemented with a CPCR. Additionally, we also follow this EN 15824 code, or ISO 21930, and this is specifically for construction products, which is a very big sector in EPD right now. So to begin with, I will present what is declared in an EPD and what information you can find in an EPD. Firstly, you can always find information about the company which has published the EPD. Secondly, in an EPD, you'll of course find the product information. The information that you need is, for example, the raw materials that are used for the product. So what is the main sources into the product? Secondly, you want to present the production process, and this includes everything from electricity to transportation methods and so on. Additionally, you will declare the end of life process, which has to do with what scenarios do the products get. For example, do they go to landfill or are they recycled, and so on. And then also additional social and economic impacts can also be declared in an EPD. So this circle here represents some of the environmental performance indicators which should be declared in an EPD. Which indicator should be declared is also depending on the product, and they are defined in the PCRs. You should also be able to find information about the program operator and the verifier, so the person who has confirmed that all the data is correct. If you have used an LCA consultant, this should also be declared in the EPD. And also you should declare where your data comes from. So the steps for creating an EPD. There are 5 general steps, and we'll go through each step more closely, but I'm just going to present them now first. Step 1 is to find a PCR which suits your product. Secondly, you will perform the LCA, and this is the biggest step in the EPD creation. And thirdly, you will format an EPD to publish. Fourth step is to verify the EPD and the background data. And last but not least, the registration and publication in the EnvironDeck portal, for example. So for the first step, you have to find a PCR. Now, PCRs are, as I mentioned, specific rules for a product type. So this is the first step when you want to create an EPD, is to define what is your product and is there an existing PCR for it. These images represent just some of the PCRs we already have in our library. We have for vegetables and oils, yarns, bridges, construction products. You can also create EPDs for services. I think we have some waste management services at the bottom left here. So the library is already pretty wide. However, if you do not find what you're looking for, you're also welcome to contact us and develop a new PCR with us. And the PCRs are developed in an open, transparent way, where also any stakeholder who is interested can participate. Also, I will mention this UNCPC code. This is a central product classification code, and if you know it for your product, it can help you find the correct PCR as well. And also at the bottom left here, we have the email to my colleagues at the PCR team, if you have any questions about this. So this second step, I will not go into too much because Nila will be presenting it after me, but it is the main background study for an EPD. It can take from 6 months to a year, and it should finish off in a LCA report, which will be used to verify the content. So thirdly, you want to format your EPD. In our GPI, or General Program Instruction, we have the rules on what should be included in an EPD. So if you're curious, you can look more closely here. We also have templates on our website that can be used, and they are optional, but they can also serve as quite a good source of information on what should be included in the EPD. I will also mention the language requirements. So EPD has to be available in some extent in English. There are two options. Either you can publish an EPD in English, and then you can also publish any translated version, and as many as you want. You may also publish an EPD in another language, but then you have to include an English summary as well. And lastly, 10 megabytes is the maximum size limit of the PDF for an EPD, which is accepted by our portal. So the fourth step is verification. So you have two types of verifiers who can perform the verification for the EPD. The first one is an individual verifier, which has been approved by us at EPD International. And the second is an accredited certification body. You can find lists of both of these on our website of the ones that are allowed to perform verifications in our system. Also, to the right here, we have the verification report, which is the end product from the verification, which you should also submit with your EPD. So there are also two more verification options that can assist you, especially if you're planning on publishing a lot of EPDs. The first one is so-called process certification. This is something that can be accredited to a company by a certification body, and it means that you are able to publish EPDs without going through the verification process. Secondly, a pre-verified tool can also assist you in EPD publications, and they can simplify the collection of LCA data in the background. So some of the data is pre-verified, so it's easier to verify for the verifier. Also, just a tip is to always contact the verifiers in good time because they are quite busy people. So the final step for your EPD is the registration and publication in EPD International or a program operator. The mandatory information to submit is an EPD document, as well as the verification report and a verification dialogue if you have one. Also, if you're publishing a EPD for a construction product, you should also include the LCA results in an Excel template, and these templates can also be found on our website. So where you submit your EPD depends a bit on your location. We do have licensees representing us around the world, and I will present them in the next slide. But if you're in one of them regions, then you should contact your licensee for registration. Any other region can go through our portal, the EPD portal. So you can create a user there, and then you will be able to upload everything on yourself. And then the last step is the final review, which is done by us. So we just check that everything is included and as it should, and then the EPD will be published within 1 to 3 days. And here you also have our email address if you have any more questions about anything on here. And lastly, I have the licensees here. So if you are in one of the regions marked green, then you're in a licensee region. And you can find the contact details for each of these on our website. And that was all from me. So I will stop sharing now. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Just a reminder for everybody who's new here since we started. You can, if you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them by using the Q&A function in the top right corner. You can submit your question and we will answer them along as the webinar goes. So just ask them there is there any questions or something that you're wondering about. But let's move on to Nile Elgenatskanat, our LCA expert from the Swedish Research Environmental Institute. Let's see if she's here. Yes, and she's ready. She will showcase our LCA assessment and how that works. So here we go. Nele, thank you.
Hi. So in this part, I will talk a little bit about life cycle assessment. My name is Nilay Elginöz Kanat, and I am working for IVL Swedish Environmental Research Institute for 3 years now. So LCA is a method to show your environmental impacts and environmental performance. It might be a product or a function. And it might answer questions like daily questions like, do I have to use paper bags or plastic bags? Or shall I use paper towels or electric hand dryers? Which is better for the environment? Eating beef or being vegan? So you can answer this kind of questions using the life cycle assessment. It can be used as a base for EPDs, but also it can be made internally in your factory or your production process for product assessment, or you can compare your products to each other. Or if you want to make a new product, and if you are designing a new product, and if you want to know beforehand if it will be environmentally friendly or not, you can also use life cycle assessment. So I will show you a quick question, but we won't go through that, but it would be nice if you can think about it. So which is more environmentally friendly, in your opinion? Is it single-use diapers or reusable, or let's say washable diapers? And I will drop this question here, which might be answered by life cycle assessment. But what is the life cycle of a product? So here you can see the life cycle of a chair, which starts from forestry industry, and you have the wood production and the production of the chair. You can see that using additional materials. And then there's this use phase, and maybe it is broken, and it might go to wood waste collection from the municipality. It might be incinerated, or maybe you are already incinerated in your fireplace. So this is a life cycle of a chair. When we have this life cycle, we have to go through the different steps. So the first step is raw material extraction. For example, you extract iron ore from earth, and then you have transport, and then manufacturing. Maybe you are just taking care of this part, but you have to also consider what is coming from raw material extraction. And then there might be another transportation with some means. For example, it might be a flight or a ship or like road transport. And then you have the packaging, maybe use stage, maybe reuse stage, and then end of life stage. For example, maybe you are recovering some resources from your product and some goes to municipal incineration or landfill. And it might even start from cradle and go to the cradle, or it might start from cradle to grave. And sometimes you have these life cycle assessment studies from cradle to gate, where you don't include the use phase. When you have this, you need to make it as a model, because we use some softwares and databases to make these calculations for LCA. And there you need to make such models that you start from the extraction processes, and you need to know how much transport you are making, what happens in the use process, and all the waste and emissions here and there, like in every process. But this is for like a product point of view. If you consider life cycle of energy production systems, then it might be a little different, because then the life cycle is not your product's life cycle. For example, here the product is energy, and the life cycle is the wind farm, life cycle of the wind farm. So you have, if this is an offshore wind farm, you have the sea, and then you have the manufacturing processes, and then you install your wind farm, and then it operates like around 20 to 25 years, and then you have the decommissioning stage. As my colleague Danielle said, we use ISO 14040 standards for life cycle assessment. And in this standard, we have to use this term, or we have to understand this term, unit processes. When we make calculations for life cycle assessment, we divide everything into unit processes, and we connect all the unit processes with flows. So these flows are intermediate flows that connect unit processes to each other. And for each unit process, you have the mass input, for example, the chemicals you use or the wood you use. And then energy, it might be heat energy or electricity. And from each unit process, you will have emissions and waste, and you should know where those wastes go. For example, if it goes to landfill or if it goes to incineration and so on. And from these unit processes, you might have products and co-products and sometimes even byproducts. So LCA methodology has 4 stages, and these are iterative. The first one is goal and scope definition. The second one is life cycle inventory. Third one is impact assessment. And the fourth one is interpretation. As you can see, the flows are both sides. So you can decide your goal and scope and collect all the data you need in the second phase. But then you can decide that, oh, I should go further, like I should have larger system boundaries, and you can go back to goal and scope, include more processes. Or in the lifecycle inventory, you might understand that this is so little and this will have very little environmental impact, so you might cut off some of them, and then you can go back to goal and scope definition. So this is an iterative process. The first phase, which is goal and scope definition, where you decide the product and the function of what you will study, and then purpose of the study and the reason of the study. For example, your reason might be to have EPDs, or your reason might be to compare your product with some other products, or to enhance your product, as in the first slide I have showed. And there you have to define your functional unit, which is one of the most important terms in life cycle assessment, because you will do all the calculations based on that functional unit. And you define your system boundaries. Will it be cradle to gate or cradle to grave or even cradle to cradle? And the types of impacts you will consider. Is it going to be only global warming potential, or do you want to take care about acidification, eutrophication, and so on? And the level of detail you want to study. The system function and functional unit is the most important thing to decide, because it can be very straightforward. Like, for example, in an energy system, it is most of the time 1 kilowatt hour of energy produced. But for a paint, for example, it might be very different, like a unit area protected in a special environment during a specific time. Then it means that indoor paint would have another functional unit, and then outdoor paint will have another functional unit. Things get more complex when you have when you produce some products which has different usages. For example, a cell phone that you can call or check your emails and do many of the other things. In the second phase, you draw your flow chart, connecting your unit processes and collect data for all these activities. Since you collect the data for your activities and you don't, for example, collect all the data for the energy production systems, we generally use 2 different kind of data. So foreground data is the data that you collect, and we have this background data. Mostly we use databases for that. That gives you, for example, if you produce electricity from coal, what are your environmental impacts? And then you connect these flows, you connect these processes. And then you can calculate everything for the one functional unit. But here, at the end of life cycle inventory, you will have hundreds of emissions coming out of one production process. And it will be very hard to interpret hundreds of emissions. So what we do is first we classify the emissions and then we characterize them. So which emissions will go to which impact categories. These two are required according to ISO standard. And there might be a third one, because in the characterization you might choose 6 impact categories, for example, or 10 impact categories, and then it might be hard to interpret them. And according to your aim, you can choose also weighting so that you can have one value for one product, and then might be easier for you to compare in between products. This third phase is optional. Here, there's a picture that we can understand better how this part works. So the first part is the classification, and then there will be, of course, much more emissions than this. Here we only have a few of them. And then we have these impact categories, and then if you do the weighting, you will have your eco points or similar index. And in the life cycle interpretation phase, it is important to tell about your calculations. It's like telling the story. So you have a goal, and then you have these calculations. So you connect everything together. And here you have to tell about what you did, which kind of allocation. For example, if you had 2 different products, and like one main product and one co-product, how did you allocate your environmental impact, since you can't think about that it will be only one product's fault? So you have to divide, and you will use an allocation method. And you will write this in your interpretation. And you have to define your system boundaries and what kind of data you have used, from which year, for example. And it would be good if you do scenario and sensitivity analysis. For example, I have this inventory, raw material X coming like 10 kilograms, but it might be also 9 kilograms maybe. And if you have the results also for the 9 kilograms, then you will see how your assumption affect your impact category results. And then you communicate your results, and maybe you propose some process enhancement in some of the processes that you see that the impacts are coming from. Yeah, and I think this is all.
Thank you very much, Nilay. We have some, we also have some additional newcomers. And just a reminder that we have a Q&A function in the top right corner. We have some questions been asked during Nilay's presentation that have been answered or are being answered. And also a double reminder that we have a live Q&A session after our next guest, Kate's presentation on how EPDs can be used in an organization and in business study. Kate McFeethers is the managing director of EPD North America, and I see that she's sitting ready here. So if you are, so Kate, you're welcome to proceed.
But I cannot share my screen, unfortunately. So, but I'm glad I sent you the slides now. Do you think
we'll see if Julie can share for you?
Okay,
yeah, that'd be
let's
great.
see if I can share for you. I think you have it for me. 1 second here. So, And now my sound works as well. So I hope you see your presentation, Kate.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Yeah.
So hi, I'm Kate McFeeters. I'm the Managing Director of the North American EPD system, and I'm going to talk a bit more about how EPDs work within your business, independently of the question of, somebody told me I need to have an EPD, because for EPD North America, that's the basis of most people finding their way to EPD North America or EPD International, is that somebody said I need an EPD. I don't know anything about it. So this is a great add-on to all the information that came before. And the points I want to talk about are EPDs and how they integrate with your business strategy. What is the EPD communicating exactly, which I barely need to touch on because everybody else covered it so well. And then how is this information used in the marketplace? Next slide, please. So I think everyone can agree that the importance of the business strategy is that it helps successful businesses deploy strategies at every level to answer the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And there are elements to the business strategy. These elements would include the goals and core values of the business, how the business is creating value for all of the stakeholders, the customers, and the business itself, how the regulatory requirements interact with the business strategy, as well as the market requirements, and then the competitive advantage. These are all components of the business strategy. And in the next slide, I'm going to begin talking about how this information that's communicated in the EPD can contribute to all of those internal and external operational tactics that fit into your business strategy. Next slide, please. So, yeah, as Neela explained so well, the EPD, you can think of it as a nutrition label. So when you look on the back of a package of cookies, it tells you what is the energy in the cookie and what are the micro and macronutrients. And this is the same information that's being reported in an EPD from the LCA model. You're talking about what is the energy embodied within that product, what are all of the different metrics for all of the selected indicators of that EPD. And in that way, you get to see at a glance what is the environmental performance or the environmental impacts of that product. And so this leads to the question, how does this contribute to my business strategy? Next slide, please. And so I'm going to talk about each of the elements of the business strategy and how EPDs contribute to those. And the first one is sort of the goals and core values. So if you go to any website for any corporation, you see everybody's strategic climate goals, whether it's net zero, overall sustainability, climate policies and objectives. But all of these goals and objectives require transparent, comparable, verifiable data in order to be able to make these claims to your stakeholders. And EPDs are, and especially the underlying LCA data, is one of the sources that can support these reporting objectives, because it's hard data that, especially when it's a third-party verified type 3 sort of data, it's very respected data. Next slide, please. Another element to business strategy is creating value. And so I don't want to say anything again that Neela said, but EPDs provide quantifiable, up-to-date, timely information about the environmental performance of products. So I like to describe this as working in a two-way street, where you don't have to think of an EPD as something you generate for a product because you need to. It's also a way to have the LCA study tell you about the product and gives you areas where you can improve the product or improve the actual manufacturing of the product to save money and resources. So think of it as a interacting component of product design, product performance, and how to understand it better. Next slide, please. Another element for business strategy is how do you have competitive.
Let's see if we can mute. Thank you.
Let's see. So for the element of competitive advantage, you know, EPDs give you credible information to differentiate products from their environmental performance standpoint. Now, I want to make it really clear that EPDs do not judge whether a product or a service meets a particular standard, and it's not there to make comparisons over you should choose this product over that one, this product is better or greener than another product. It's a data point that provides information for the bigger picture on how to choose between two products. So one example of that is that the data from EPDs are used in whole building LCA models that take into account more than just the information in the EPD. It's how does that particular product interact with the entire building to affect the environmental performance of the building. Another example would be that if looking at the graphic, if product 3 is located much closer to the site where it's going to be used, but product 1 is located on the other side of the globe, that's something that needs to be taken into consideration independently. But the beauty of having the EPD is it gives you all this information to help you make decisions, both for the end user consumer and for the manufacturer, where you can identify areas where you can improve a product. Next slide, please. Another element of business strategies is the, excuse me, the regulatory requirements. So over time, we're moving from a place where having EPDs for products has been a voluntary measure, and that is shifting to becoming mandatory in a lot of different areas. So an example would be in the US, the federal and state level Buy Clean programs. The EU's moving more towards requiring EPDs across product categories for general consumption, and then examples of governments putting limits on the emissions of industries or buildings or services. Another example is also preferential purchasing programs, and these tend to be domestic, but a government purchasing program has a lot of buying power, and if they're giving preference to products with some sort of environmental performance, an EPD often being one of those indicators of environmental performance, that it gives the product with an EPD preference over a product that does not have an EPD. Next slide, please. And then this feeds into also the market requirement element, which is that if the market is leaning towards having certification schemes for buildings, for example, like a LEED certified building, and that certification scheme is moving towards the use of EPDs as a contributing factor to that certification, then the market is pushing for having an EPD in order to be competitive in the market. A really good example in the US is the flooring industry, and they're one of the leaders of the sustainable reporting in the US market, because you can look up almost any flooring material and have tons of transparent information in EPDs on how to evaluate those flooring products. And then in addition to some certification schemes, either requiring the use of EPDs or the data from the EPD as part of a whole building LCA model, you have certification schemes that just generally emphasize reporting and transparency. And that's one of the areas where EPDs really shine, because they're based off of transparent reporting of information about the product. Next slide, please. So just in summary, I wanted, to both emphasize that the the regulatory environment is moving towards requiring EPDs for a lot of products, for a lot of circumstances, for a lot of services. And on top of that, the market competitiveness is pushing for having this information, especially in the construction industry, but in general, more and more. However, even though there's a lot of reasons that you have to have an EPD for your product, eventually there's also a lot of really important uses for it outside of I have to have an EPD, which is, it's great, relevant, timely data that's credible for use when evaluating a product on the manufacturing side without even publishing an EPD and LCA has value for evaluating a product for a manufacturer and decreasing the environmental impact of a product, but also looking for ways to more efficiently create a product and, have possibilities for cost and resource savings. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Julia.
Thank you very much, Kate. The site taking up. Let's see here. Do we have any live questions for Kate or for LCA expert Nile or perhaps Danielle about EPDs or anything like that? Anyone who wants have any questions to ask?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, hi. I'm from UK, and I'm actually a a lead of product sustainability in our company. And there is a lot of question I get from the sales colleague, like how to compare two EPDs from a competitor product. And there is so many parameters, and you cannot actually compare and say which is good or bad. So there is a in Netherlands, they use some euros values to put a product on a €1, €2, or €3, and then you can compare like that. And there are many others. So, what do you suggest? I mean, what's the best way, or is there any way, or there is no way to compare? Thanks.
Thank you. Perhaps Danielle here can ask this question.
I can start a bit, but maybe my colleague Adam can fill out if I missed anything. But we do get some questions in the support about this, how to compare the data. And of course, there are some parameters that you have to be that you have to keep an eye on when you're doing this. For example, the functional unit is of course important. So make sure you're comparing the numbers in a fair way. But Adam, would you like to fill out more tips of other things you should think about?
Of course. I was answering a Q&A while you said, could you just rephrase the problem that you were concerned about regarding comparability?
So it's like you get in EPD, you get global warming potential, eutrophication, acidification. So if I compare, sometime GWP would be better for product A and bad for product B. But these are like very similar products, however manufactured by different companies. So comparing these, and then so should I take eutrophication as a higher parameter so that only compare on eutrophication or only compare on GWP? Because I see in the market, everyone compares from the GWP value and that's it. The other parameters just they forget about it. But is there a way to combine everything together so that you can compare two products which are very similar but by different manufacturers?
Yes, in general you can do that, because if they are developed based on the same PCR, of course, because then they are developed with the same requirements, the same circumstances, and so on. So then it's more of a fair comparison. I don't know We don't I have not seen any weighted results. If you are also leaning towards that, where you like combine different indicators into a single indicator, I haven't seen that in EPDs yet, but it's for sure the global warming potential that is the most relevant one nowadays. And but there are also it can also be important to have the other indicators to get the full picture. Although some indicators may have a little bit higher lost the word uncertainty in the characterization factors. I hope that answered a little bit of your question.
Thank you. I think we had a hand raised. Yes. Let's see if we can pronounce it. Sridharan Venkatesh.
Yeah, it's Venkatesh.
If you go,
Venkatesh.
yeah, thank you. If you can go ahead, Anil.
Yes, it was really a nice presentation and a good overview about the complete process. Thank you for that. And it was also interesting to see the lead time for calculating the footprint through LCA. And my question is more related to the step before that. For example, I don't have a PCR for one of my product. What is generally the lead time to create a PCR in collaboration with you?
1 year.
That's 1 year. Okay.
Yes.
For a completely new, let's say, a material or a product.
Yes, there are several steps which involves also involving other parties from the industry or other stakeholders, and it's going to go through a closed and open consultation. So it's a lot of steps where it have to go through and also reviewed by our technical committee. So it can also be some delays because you are dependent on some specific person and so on. So, but 1 year is what we usually estimate the time to.
Okay, that irrespective of the complexity of the product, or is it like
no? It's a
the
general
minimum timeline?
Yeah,
Sorry?
it's a more general
Okay.
farm rule, exactly.
Okay.
But sometimes it can take a little bit more time if there's not only like a complex product, but also a very unusual product, I would say. I think we had one PCR on yacht, and in that we also had tried to find someone with that competence on that kind of a product. It's more of a unusual, I would say, but for sure the complexity can affect the time as well.
Okay.
But yacht is also quite complex, I would say.
No, that's understandable. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It usually is. I think we have Susanna P. Costa. I think you had your hand raised if you were done with your question.
Yes, hello. I've been talking with Adam on the last days about some subjects, but during this presentation, I had this doubt because you talk about the regulatory requirements, and just to understand, and after understand a little bit more about the process, I want to understand basically these regulatory requirements are about is supposed to be in the country or Europe or international. My main question is, what is the major requirements we should apply on an EPD? Because basically, in my case, we have this kind of clients that work not only in Portugal but outside of Portugal, and for sure they will have to see their product well in other countries. And basically, when I do a verification on EPD, what should be the major regulations we should verify? Just this question. Sorry.
No problem. Very good question. It is typically written in the PCR if there are any special regulation that you need to follow. That is all I can say right now. But if you are uncertain about some regional regulation, you can also always take contact with our PCR team to check if this should be how we should tackle how we should if that should be followed or not, and what if it contradicts with some kind of European regulation or so on. What do you do then? These kind of questions you are always welcome to ask our PCR team. But there are also some that already mentioned in the standards. One of the most used standards is EN 1584, which is a European standard, and they have also some kind of regulations on, for example, to declare hazard, very toxic and hazard substances that use in production, for example. Yeah, and so yeah, in some cases there are already mentioned in the relevant documents and standards, and sometimes it's not that clear, and then you can always contact us and we see how we can handle it.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Thank you. I think we had Umanendra Singh. You had a question, or you have your arm raised for.
Yes, hi. Thank you for answering my first question. And this is about if you run any courses or something where I can, or people like me can learn more about what's going on behind an EPD assessment. Like I have read your PCR about construction product, and I have read EN 15824A2. But there's so much cross-referencing in these standards. Like you're on page 2, you go back to 6 and back to 1, and then you get lost after a while. So is there any like online course or something where we can sit and understand the PCR and EN 15804? Because when we do the product EPDs, then consultant tell us several things, and we have 2-3 consultants. They tell all of them have their different stories. Like, no, we can't. You should not incinerate, and you should not use the power in this case. Biogenic calculation a little bit different in this case, and we get really confused. So really want some help from organization like you who can educate us, but in more detail, not like superficial, but right into the deep detail. And we are happy to like spend time and learn. So yeah, something that would be good. Thanks.
Thank you, for sure. We are very happy out of interest for EPDs, which we can tell. I think Siratan, did you have another question, or did you? Your hand is raised.
I can say that to that we do have some meetings, at least for our verifiers, going through these new updates and requirements, and there is a chat group that we use, but we also have planned to broaden the communication platform to more people where we can discuss this, because I'm totally agree that some standards is not always the easiest reading document. It's very static and jumps from here and there, and yeah, I totally agree that and some also leaves room for interpretation, because you cannot always be super specific, because there are some cases that you have to consider in specific situations. You can't always be like super specific on that part. So it sometimes can also leave room for interpretation, which can also make it a little bit more harder to understand what I should do when and now, for example. But we will take that into consideration for maybe another meeting, Julia, where we can have this kind of sessions where we go through more into details on topics that are more challenging for our LCA consultants and verifiers.
For sure, we will definitely expand on this webinar series. I see a lot of interest here, but thank you very much for the question. Let's see here. I think Srit Haran, I think is your hand still up, or did you have another question?
No, I forgot to.
Yeah, no problem. let's see here. Then I think we have Romy Kaudere. You had a question?
Yes, hello. So thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. So we wanted to ask, we have an LCA from 2019, and if it's possible to get, an EPD on this LCA, basically, if we can, base the EPD on this LCA or, not.
Is the LCA already done based on a PCR, or is it just that's my first question. Is it based on a PCR that we have in our library?
So we looked it up, your PCR, and so our LCA is based on the PEFTR, so the your product environmental footprint category rules, which were published in 2017, right? So it's based on this.
Okay. In that sense, you need to update it just so it gets compliant with one of our PCRs in order to publish it in our system.
Okay, so it has.
But you can at least you can use quite a lot of it, but you still need to do some kind of updates and also check if the data that you use is also fulfill our data quality requirements. In general, I know that I don't know what product you're doing for, but for EN 1594, the standard for construction products, there is a rule that generic data can only be 10 years old and specific data 5 years old. So there are also those kind of requirements you have to also look for in case the LCA is a little bit older.
Yes, I see. Okay, then we will check, but we would have to update some things, but we can still use part of it. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question. We have a Lauren McKenzie. Your floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Can I ask, is there certain certification bodies that you would recommend for different industries? So do any specialize, say, in the chemical industry? What is the lead time on like registering with a certification body or a verifier to actually joining them? And when should you initiate that process?
So we don't recommend any verifier, but we do recommend taking contact with several ones to get the best price and the best fit for your LCA. So I think many certification body will be appropriate for your EPD, if I understood your question correctly.
Okay, and when should you initiate that? So when you've already started the calculation or when you're still developing your methodology?
You can initiate the contact while you're doing the LCA. That is also a approach that is introduced in the LCA critical review standard ISO 14071. So it's a valid approach to also initiate the contact already while you're doing the EPD, but you can also do it afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more raised hands, and the clock, we have 2 minutes left, so maybe it's time to wrap up. Just want to say thank you for all the questions. I know my colleague here is typing furiously, so we will try to finish all with all of the questions that has come in. The presentation slides will be sent out to any participants to this afterwards tomorrow, or at least tomorrow Swedish time. We will also post the recording on our website together with the recording from our first webinar, which was yesterday. So thank you very much, all of you, for participating here. And also, if you have any more need for guidance or any more questions that require more detail, you can always email support@environdec.com, which Danielle showed on her presentation, for any type of questions or if you're interested in publishing EPDs or anything like that. But thank you very much. Have a good evening here in Sweden, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for attending. Nice to meet you all.